Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Gabriel Allen Cummings.
And I'm Sonika Garcia, and this is Breaking the Code,
Podcast series by the Havas Medical Anthropology team. We're here to take the BS out of behavioral science by illuminating the why behind the what of behaviors, rituals, and symbols that people take for granted. We hope to arm you, our listeners, with the tools you need to make sense of behavioral science and help you apply it to your work as communication extraordinaires. Welcome back, everyone. This is a special episode, a bit of a tradition now at Breaking the Code, where when Republica Havas comes out with a new white paper, we have them on the podcast. We talk about multicultural insights, really get deep into the new insights that they found. This is the second or third time that we've had Ada on from Republica Havas, and it's always great to have her back. We're also joined by Mark Makuch, who represents the CX side, who wrote the paper as well. I'll read their intros and give a brief summary of the white paper itself, and then we can dive into the episode and really get into the nitty gritty of it. So Eirasmin Lokpez-Cobo, or Ada as we call her, is the EVP of Cultural Intelligence and Transformation at Republica Havas, where she leads cross-cultural marketing strategies that address health disparities through culturally relevant campaigns. With over 20 years of experience building brand equity for Fortune 500 companies, she is a recognized health equity advocate, best-selling author, nonprofit founder, and frequent national conference speaker. Should also say she's a frequent guest on Breaking the Code. Ada, how you doing today? Welcome back to the podcast.
I'm doing great, and I'm super excited to be back here with you guys again.
We're always excited to have you on the pod, and we're also joined by Mark Makuch for the first time, again representing the CX side of the discussion. Mark is the EVP of CX strategy at the Havas Health Network, where he brings over 2 decades of experience driving innovation at the intersection of customer experience, digital transformation, and health equity. Mark is recognized for leading the omni-channel CX strategy for Bay Fortis in 2023 and 24, helping to establish the brand as a new standard in RSV prevention. Mark's work has been featured in industry forums and internal best practice case studies, and he is sought after for his ability to translate complex health challenges into actionable, audience-centric strategies. Mark, so great to have you on the podcast for the first time. How you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
And again, we are so excited to have you both on this one, really to talk about the white paper, the work that you're doing that's coming out of it. And so I'll read a brief summary of the white paper. That's the last thing I'll read, and then we can get really into the discussion. The white paper, Where Culture Meets AI, Scaling the Human-Centered Healthcare Experience, comes from Republica Havas, Havas CX, and M3MI, an external research vendor. It explores how AI is transforming healthcare engagement, but argues that without cultural intelligence, it risks deepening bias and missing the needs of a rapidly growing multicultural population. With data from over 23,000 patients, it reveals a major shift. Patients are bypassing traditional healthcare pathways and turning to AI-influenced ecosystems shaped by culture and affordability. It makes the case that the future of healthcare belongs to organizations that bridge AI scale and human-centered cultural insight, turning efficiency into relevance and relevance into trust, equity, and growth. One of the things that stuck out to us was this mention of cultural intelligence. So, Sonika, I'm going to kick it over to you to start. Could you give a brief discussion of what cultural intelligence is for our audience?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it was such a central part of this paper. And so just to really quickly level set for our listeners, when we talk about cultural intelligence, it's really the ability to see people in their full context, not just as patients, but not just as doctors. And we've talked about this on the podcast quite a few times, but it's really removing the title and really viewing the person as an individual shaped by culture, identity, trust, real life constraints and experiences. And when we think about that in healthcare, it's really what helps organizations understand, why people make the choices that they do, why that same message, that same tool, that same experience that we're constructing for our audiences might not land the same way for everyone. So we think about how that translates to AI. In an AI-driven world, cultural intelligence is really what's going to turn that automation into relevance. And ultimately, that relevance is what's going to help build trust. And we know that that's really the key component in healthcare. It's trust and being able to build that strong foundation. So that's how we think about cultural intelligence as broadly and plainly put as possible. the white paper really goes into more detail on putting some color around this in the context of AI. So definitely check that out. But I want to kick it over to our wonderful guests. So Ada and Mark, we'd love to hear from you. How has the feedback been to the paper? I know you've both been traveling, presenting this to various audiences. I would love to have the listeners hear what people are reacting to the most, and anything that surprised you as you started to receive some of this feedback.
Mark, if you want, I'll go first. I would say that it has been both encouraging and concerning at the same time. I would say encouraging. Okay. Yeah, because we're getting a lot of interest, as you mentioned, and invitations to present in panels and webinars and, podcasts like this one. Because there is definitely a white space, a gap. And to me, that is the concerning part of it, right? Because AI is moving at such a fast pace. It's transforming healthcare engagement at an unprecedented speed. And as a little bit, what you were mentioning at the beginning when you were defining cultural intelligence, automation without cultural intelligence can just create very, very dangerous irrelevance. It can deepen health inequities. It can miss business opportunities. So to us to see that there are a lot of conversations when it comes to biases and underrepresentation of multicultural patients when it comes to LLM models, but very few conversations when it comes to actually weaving in cultural intelligence, throughout the whole strategic process and throughout the whole patient journey. It's concerning, and it gives us kind of like a lot of almost fuel or strength to continue digging deeper and deeper and doing additional work and additional research on this space.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's definitely encouraging of like, okay, yes, this is resonating, this is interesting, but wow, there's probably still a lot of work to be done from like an education component. So that's really interesting. Mark, what about for you?
Yeah, I can echo the same things that Eirasmin said, and I think one of the things that we're hearing is sort of the recognition of how important it is. The fact that as AI just explodes and it's on this just incredible course, and that kind of can't be missed, and taking over sort of more and more aspects of our lives. Because at the end of the day, these are all based on information that is out there that is for good and for bad. And so we have the power to actually have impact and to train AI models in different ways. And so there's this sense of course this is important. Why aren't we sort of more on top of this? And it's such an important thing that we do. And it's critical that we kind of shift how we think about it and really make sure that cultural intelligence and that context is set appropriately, more consistently.
Yeah, and something that you just said around, it's for good and bad, and it's really something that as a team, when we were preparing for the episode, and of course after reading the white paper, there was a lot of conversation around, well, for multicultural groups specifically, of course there are concerns and ways that AI actually, doesn't do what we want it to do and deepen some of the problems of the system that already exist. And we'll get into that. But I think, from the other lens, it was, well, there's sort of this other attitude towards AI from multicultural patients, and that's leaning into it as an information source because it does fill some gaps that currently exist in the healthcare space. So while, yes, there are challenges, we've seen data that shows that many multicultural groups turn to AI for accessibility and convenience because that's something that they struggle with when it comes to actually making doctor's appointments, seeing a specialist, getting a diagnosis. And so, yeah, AI is not the doctor, but at least they're getting information faster than they probably are going the traditional route through our healthcare system. When we think about empathy, it's sort of, empathy is a big thing that we revisit when it comes to discussions on, these groups really needing to be understood by healthcare professionals in a way that feels empathetic and resonant to their experiences. And so when you think about AI, you could get all sorts of empathetic responses and really warm responses, exactly the kind of support that you need based on your frustration levels or your level of confusion or fatigue. And so, yeah, I think, there are challenges, but also it's filling a really important space for these communities when it comes to health information. And I'm totally simplifying it. And I think we could have a whole separate episode on that topic specifically. But the white paper does a great job at then outlining, well, these communities are also very skeptical of AI, and that sort of can't be, that's the truth of the matter as well. So, Gabe, I mean, I think kicking it over to you, like, what are some of the ways that, or the reasons, I should say, that multicultural groups, while they do lean into using it, oftentimes are skeptical as well?
Yeah, I mean, and it goes into, and the paper talks about this as well. It's when AI medical tools are being used. It's AI in proximity of a medical system that multicultural patients have grown up, inherited mistrust from, or experienced personally themselves. I think the paper does a really interesting job of kind of laying out the idea that multicultural patients have a high familiarity with AI, using it, navigating it, not totally sure if they're getting like the most out of it that they can. And then what really struck us was the idea of trust, as Sanika was talking about when it comes to AI medical tools. 64%, the paper is saying 64% feel comfortable having their data being used by AI medical tools, which is something that kind of struck us because we started the episode talking about the pace that AI is being adopted at. And 64%, while it's, higher than 50, it's almost 40% of multicultural patients are saying, like, I'm going to opt out of using these systems because I don't know exactly what's going to come of it. And so it's actually really great, Ada and Mark, that we have you here to kind of look at like the systemic layers and the systemic effects that kind of come from that distrust. It's distrust that's totally warranted, but there are still consequences of it. There are still gaps that are being created. So Ada, over to you, just to speak to that 64% number and also speak to like what happens when these multicultural patients are choosing to opt out of giving their data to AI medical tools.
Exactly. And I think that both of you bring up very, very good points and are the different sides of the coin, of everything else in life. Yes, AI is democratizing information and, all our different audiences and underserved audiences now have readily available information throughout multiple channels. What is that doing? Many times that is collapsing the full patient journeys because at the same time that they're looking for information, as you mentioned, they can find AI generated health information way faster than they can get to doctors and start creating their own perceptions of, which type of treatments they should uptake or not. Even before they have conversations with their networks, their families, their communities, which was such a common practice for multicultural groups. So what happens is that, unfortunately, when you democratize information, that you have audiences that cannot differentiate between credible and non-credible health information, it has a detrimental impact, as you were saying, Gabe, on trust, and it perpetuates a cycle of underrepresentation. How and why? Well, on the one hand, they are getting information faster that they don't know that they can trust. Then when they get to their doctors, that we already know that there is a trust issue when it comes to multicultural audiences. And in the conversations that they're having with their doctors, AI-related tools are brought up as part of or AI-powered tools are brought up as part of the conversation when it comes to treatment management. Then, there is a skepticism. Not only there is a skepticism there is a skepticism for them to provide their data to feed any type of LLM model. Let's just start there. But if they can trust the doctor's recommendations, if they can trust the information that they're finding online, and they're already coming from a background of mistrusting institutions, of mistrusting healthcare providers, of mistrusting information overall that is not created for them, then that definitely perpetuates that underrepresentation cycle. And when you pair that with the current reality that we have an affordability crisis when it comes to healthcare, and almost half of Americans are citing cost as a barrier to accessing healthcare. And more patients, and particularly multicultural patients, are trying to go online to find whatever information that they can and avoid going to actually meet with a doctor because of cost concerns. You can see how this is a very dangerous cycle.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. So, I mean, as you said, it's completely democratized. It democratized. Like everybody can turn on a web browser and have access to an AI tool that will tell them something about their health, which is in many ways incredible and amazing and wonderful. And the way that those interactions occur, and to your point, Sanika, how empathetic they can be is really great. But we always need to look at kind of what's under the hood and how these things work, and how they're constructed and what information they're using. And when we look at that, we know that there's inconsistent safeguards, right? We know that they don't necessarily have safety measures. They're not looking and validating information. There's a lot of myths that they amplify because they're just hearing those myths on social media, and they're, again, not verifying them. And then, like you mentioned this, like the confidence with which AI provides information is incredibly compelling. These are very convincing tools. And so if you're delivering false information to someone who doesn't understand or doesn't know whether it's false or not, it's very easy to trust that information, even though it may not be scientifically backed, right? It's super, super persuasive, and it's hard to distinguish. And so, and this impact is often sort of the highest where you've got vulnerable populations, where there's low digital literacy, or if there's already fragmented health information or health systems. It just sort of exacerbates those existing disparities, and it's difficult for people to see through what might be misinformation. And ultimately, you were talking about the trust factor. When if they're hearing one thing from an AI tool, something else from their doctor, this can just make that trust even worse, right? It can cause them to delay treatment. It can cause them to not take not adhere to a treatment that they've been given because they're hearing something different. So these tools are incredibly, incredibly important, and in terms of how we construct them, in terms of how we educate people to engage with them and to listen to them, how to prompt them even. I mean, this is a whole another world of how we need to educate ourselves, and also, quite frankly, to educate the tools.
Yes, such a good point, and really important. I think because you are both so brilliant. Not only was it understanding the limitations and how important those limitations are when we think about these populations using AI. But then, you did something about it, right? That's the piece, the application piece. And I'm sure our listeners like, what can we do? What can be done? How can we actually use AIs? We're not saying not to, but it's use AI in the right way to best represent and provide solutions for these populations. And so I want to give either one of you to start, but if you could take our listeners through this amazing model that you're creating, a quick summary of the model, and then Mark, if we could go into talking about how this model actually empowers brands to take this audience first approach through the entire patient journey.
Absolutely. So when it comes to the overview of the model, we have 4 layers, and those 4 layers, they build on each other to really not only deepen the understanding of the nuances that drive behavior, but to really activate, measure, and optimize against those nuances. So we start with the foundational contextual layer, and it defines the cultural context that AI needs to understand behavior. And that's going to be kind of like your initial kind of like social demographics that will give you that foundational understanding to know the what. From there, you're going to start layering in, as we mentioned before, the cultural interpretation. So that is the interpretational layer, and that is the why. It explains why patterns exist, and it's not just, connecting data at a scale, which is what you're doing with your regular LLMs. Then from there, you get to execute, and it is what are the nuances that are guiding the outputs that are going to land on culturally relevant approaches that scan for biases and stereotypes, and that overcome those biases and stereotypes with truly resonant work. And finally, you land on the optimization layer, where it's kind of like where you're shifting from just efficiency to actual outputs that ladder up to trust, to relevance, and to impact, and that is grounded on ongoing feedback loops that allowed for keeping your finger in the pulse of the market, because culture, as we know, is not static. It's in constant evolution. So none of these models can be once and done.
And then just in terms of how we make sure that we're looking at this and taking an audience first approach, primarily, and one of the most important things is around informing through first party data and making sure that we're prioritizing that. So that, again, these AI models will absolutely look and scrape across a broad range of information. And so that being the case, we want to make sure that we're emphasizing kind of that first person data component, so that especially for multicultural audiences, right, where it's that story and it's that the truth from the perspective of that audience that is prioritized, and we want to make sure that that is taking precedence. And then the second thing is that first layer, that contextual layer, the cultural context layer, which is so critical. I think, Sonika, you mentioned in your first opening statement, it was about seeing people in their full context and how cultural intelligence is so important for that. And this is around making sure that that context is accurate. And I think in a lot of ways, we know about the myths and we know about stereotypes and things like that, but to really train an AI engine on those myths and on those stereotypes and be accurate to create that context takes an understanding and familiarity that is also, I think, essential and requires people like Ada who are very close to the truth of what that lived experience is. And so that, I think, is kind of one of the most important things that we're doing, because that context is really critical for everything else that kind of comes after it. So it's essential that we get that right.
Great. And I mean, something that we think about with any model is, how do we go about actually balancing effectiveness and efficiency metrics to make sure that when we measure success, it's measured the right way?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really easy to get into a game of low cost, high engagement, what's going to give me the biggest bang for the buck, right? And it's so tempting, right? And especially if you just kind of stop at the level of engagement. You're getting engagement, you're getting clicks, you're getting views, you're getting these things, and you can kind of do the math and say, yeah, this is great quote unquote value that I'm getting for this whatever experience that I've put out into the market. It's really critical that we look beyond that and look at the resulting behavior. And are we driving trust? Are we reducing barriers? Are we driving adherence? Are we driving positive outcomes, positive health outcomes for our audiences? And I think, we need to, and that does take time and it does take effort. And I think that's what we need to really hold ourselves to do that and to do that consistently, so that, again, we're not just looking at those very surface level metrics that can tell us that we're doing a good job and we're spending money wisely. If it's not pulling through in the behavior, if it's not generating the actual outcomes that we want, then it's really just going to be kind of wasted dollars.
Yeah. And I think, something that you said of being able to measure actual impact, it's really crucial to then be able to gauge, the longevity and continued use of something. I think when you just think about, what are the clicks in the moment, or what's that new engagement, right? It's this is why a lot of these innovations sort of die down. and don't end up actually serving the communities in the long term. And so, I think that makes total sense and really important. Thank you. Ada, how have you been actually using this tool so far? And then when we think about, I mean, I know it's all very new. What's your vision for tell us how it's used today and then what your vision is for how it's going to be used in the future.
I love the question because that's exactly, what kind of like fuels my passion right now. That is, how are we weaving in cultural intelligence all throughout the strategic and creative process? And we have built an agentic modular model or approach in which cultural intelligence is at the core, is at the center. Like the whole purpose is for cultural intelligence for never to be an afterthought. So the way that we build it is that, the initial core models of the approach not only have your overall brand understanding, your category understanding, your persona understanding, but it has a cultural signal model that always has to be plugged in, of course, with an agentic workflows in the background that are always in balance with human collaborations, with check and balances from, or cultural experts that are checking the translation of data into insights and then overlaying the cultural intelligence into the initial findings to deepen that resonance. And then from there, you start adding more and more layers of intelligence that not only measure the initial value-driven behaviors, but what is happening in the now when it comes to the socio-political context. What is happening in the now when it comes to systemic barriers? How are social determinants of health currently impacting behavior? And what's going to be the impact of these variables on future behaviors? And then from there, we bring it all the way down with experts like Mark. We go to media and then to CX. And from there, we agentic intelligence to help us develop, along with very targeted cultural understanding, the journeys that are the foundation for resonant strategies and creative.
I have to say, I really have an appreciation for the work that you're doing here, because I think that as we become more AI empowered, and Mark, it goes to the point that you were saying, like the scale that we can work at becomes very obvious and intuitive, but making sure that that cultural intelligence is brought through, it's kind of like one of the questions of this time, where it's like ensuring that we have the right balance of agent and AI inclusion into the work that we're doing, because it's necessary and important to keep up at that scale I was talking about before, but also making sure that we have that human input as well. And it's something that we're all navigating how to use, but really we at HMA have an appreciation for this model and this approach, because it's merging the two all throughout the journey. And so as we kind of wrap up this episode, we like to give it to our guests to kind of have a last word. If there's anything that we've said that you'd like to highlight for listeners, anything that we haven't gotten to, I'd like to give the floor to both of you to kind of close us out for the episode. So Mark, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I mean, I think that what we need to do is start using the technology, in the right way and in creative ways, right? So part of it is doing things like, let's create agents that can do scans of the social universe and identify new myths, new stereotypes, whatever is happening, so that we can continually update our that cultural context and make sure that we're identifying those health inequities, we're identifying those things that drive up barriers and erode trust. And so I think we can make the technology work positively for us in a creative way. So I'm excited about a lot of the things that it can do, and again, to your point, the scale at which it can work, and the impact that it can have. And I think if We need to be working with the technology. We need to understand its limitations, and we need to really value our input into it and how we construct it. It's not something that's out of our control. It's not something that we have to just kind of hope for the best. I think it's something that we really need to be thoughtful about how we shape it and mold it and utilize it on an ongoing basis. So again, we can make sure that that cultural context is included in everything that we produce.
Absolutely agree. And I would have to say that, for the brands that we partner with, it's crucial to always highlight that when it comes to cultural intelligence, we are moving the needle in health equity, but it is a must and not a nice to have to really gel growth. When you pair cultural intelligence, it can unlock remarkable potential for brands. As we mentioned before, you can surface patterns at scales, but at the same time, you can maintain that authentic human connection that is needed for true resonance. You can achieve personalization that can truly respect cultural context, as you were saying at the beginning, Sonika, that, that empathy is just key for the connection. And finally, you can build systems that are not only understanding people, but at the end of the day, that can gel, kind of like that true meaningful output that you're looking, that is develop that relationships that audiences and patients are expecting right now. What they're expecting from us is 100% audience first approach.
Thank you so much. No, this is incredible work. I think it's getting ahead of, it's not considering this stuff too late. I think oftentimes conversations that we have, we're not considering these really important parts of research and using tools in the right moments, and we miss the mark. And so really appreciate you both kind of putting your brilliance and your work behind this. We really encourage everyone listening to check out the white paper. We definitely did not provide anywhere as, close to as much of like the really important detail that's in there. So definitely check it out. We'll link it as well. And, thank you both so much for the time. We know you're both busy and this has been really great.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting us. It's always great to have a conversation with you.
Of course. Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. This has been really fun.
It's great. And so for Breaking the Code, I'm Gabriel Allen Cummings.
And I'm Sonika Garcia. Thanks for listening.
The Havas Medical Anthropology team helps brands translate cultural and behavioral insight into strategies that disrupt and resonate. What we unpack today is exactly the type of lens we bring to understanding audiences and designing impactful communication. If this sparked an idea, or you're interested in working with us, reach out at medicalanthropology@havas.com. Until next time.